guys, this video is going to give you a quick overview of the American literary timeline. It will not go in depth into any of the literary periods. You'll have other videos that will do that for you. This is just going to give you an overview of what you can expect for the year. Let's get started. So the very first literary period that we're going to look at is the colonial period, and we're going to focus specifically into Puritan writing. And this literary period lasts from 1660 to 1776. The characteristics of this writing include the fact that it was instructive. That means that we're going to have a great deal of nonfiction literature, and it's going to seek to reinforce the authority of the church, and also that all people are corrupt and must be saved by God. And therefore, these topics lead to themes that revolve around ethics, responsibility, and survival. This makes sense during this literary period because people are living in dangerous wildernesses, trying to survive and maintain their religious convictions. The Revolutionary War is going to cause the colonial literary period to end. And the Revolutionary War lasts from 1775 to 1783. And it's going to mark the beginning of the Enlightenment period, which lasts from 1776 to 1825. The Enlightenment period was catalyzed by the desire for revolution, and therefore, within this writing, we're going to see topics such as growing patriotism and instilling pride into the new American identity. And the writing is going to seek to create common agreement about issues, specifically political and philosophical issues. It's always also going to seek out creating a national mission and an American character. Therefore, one similarity that this literary period has with the previous colonial literary period is that it's instructive in nature. However, instead of providing instruction based upon religion, this literary era is going to provide instruction on values, specifically what American values are going to be. So while the Enlightenment period was marked by the Revolutionary War, following the Enlightenment period we have the Romantic period. And this is where writing moves from being more political to more imaginative. So the Romantic literary period lasts from 1825 to 1865, and it reacted against the restraints of the Enlightenment period. So instead of being about politics and policy and philosophy, this literary period, the Romantic literary period, reveled in new freedoms and possibilities. If you think about a brand new country, the boundaries, there are no boundaries. The possibilities are limitless, and therefore people were excited about their futures and what they might find in this brand new country that they've created. Therefore, the writing of this time utilizes themes of spontaneity, imagination, subjectivity, and the purity of nature. We're also going to see a huge increase in fiction writing and poetry writing. And we're also going to see the creation of two subgenres, which is going to include the Gothic subgenre and the Transcendental subgenre. We're probably already familiar with the Gothic subgenre through authors like Edgar Allan Poe, but let's take a closer look at Transcendentalism in case we are unfamiliar with that. So here we have Transcendental writing, and that lasts from 1835 to 1860, and remember, it's a part of the Romantic literary movement. So Transcendentalism was an American philosophical and spiritual movement. So it just wasn't a writing style, it's much bigger than that. And it focused on the primacy of the individual conscience and the fact that we can trust the mind of the individual because nature created people and God created nature. And therefore, Transcendentalism rejected materialism in favor of closer communion with nature, which meant a closer communion with the truth and God. Now, Transcendentalism and Romanticism as a writing style ended with the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. And the Civil War marked the beginning of the realistic period that lasted from 1865 to 1910. An important thing to know about the realistic period is that it covers a large chunk of historical development in U.S. history. It covers the Civil War, the entire Reconstruction, and the beginning decades of the Jim Crow era. So a great deal happened in U.S. history during the realistic period. Now, realism writing is marked by the following characteristics. It was a reaction to the devastations of the Civil War. The Civil War was fought on U.S. soil. It's called the War Between Brothers, and it resulted in a large death toll that tore apart families and tore apart a country. And because of this, writing turned to much darker and more realistic themes. Realistic writing sought to give accurate, detailed portrayals of ordinary and contemporary life, and it aimed at an honest portrayal of the everyday person. And ultimately, realistic writing rejected the sensationalism, the exaggeration, and the melodrama of the Romantic period. These two literary periods are quite distinctly at odds with each other. You can think of the Romantic literary period as opposite to the realistic literary period. Now, the realistic period ended with the beginning of World War I, which lasted from 1914 to 1918, and World War I marks the beginning of the modern period. The modern period lasts from the 1890s to 1945, but it's important to know that it didn't become widely used until 1917, and even though it's said to have ended with World War II in 1945, it still had characteristics lasting into the 1960s. And these characteristics include the following. It was a reaction to the disillusionment caused by war, specifically World War I, and therefore it radically breaks with the traditional modes of Western art, thought, religion, social conventions, and morality. World War I was a devastating war with high death tolls and widespread destruction, and it caused writers, artists, and people in general to question the norms that they had been taught. Therefore, major themes of this literary period include attacks on the notions of hierarchy. It experiments in new forms of narrative, such as stream of consciousness. It utilizes philosophies such as existentialism. It utilizes alternative viewpoints and modes of thinking, and also it tries new tactics such as being self-referential as a means of drawing attention to the relationships between artist and audience in form and content. This type of writing is known as an avant-garde period, and it led to some very interesting subgenres, which included the Harlem Renaissance and the Lost Generation. So, the Harlem Renaissance is going to last from 1918 to 1930, and we'll learn a great deal more about that subgenre later in the year, as well as the subgenre of the Lost Generation, which lasted from 1918 to the 1930s as well. What marked the end of modernism was World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, and following World War II, we will then go into contemporary writing. So that is your overview of the American literature timeline. Look forward to some more videos that will give you some in-depth perspectives on each of these literary periods.